As exhibitions since last year have been moving online more and more, becoming accessible to a global audience, can you talk a little bit about your investment in the local as curators? And going along those lines, what does local mean to you? And whoever would like to jump in, go ahead.
Thanks, Maxine. I guess I can start. Again, it's an honor to be here with everyone. I want to say that during COVID, specifically being invited to work with Slash, still a very new space, and so it felt like the pandemic with everything that we're dealing with sheltering in place and having to really pause and reconfigure how we want to reach audiences and connect. It felt like both a challenge to really take that delay on without being able to be in a physical space and launch the exhibition as we had originally planned, but also a real opportunity to think about ways that perhaps could be innovative in a really dark time. So, I can't sit here and say that it's been easy. I think it's been really challenging, and a lot of us have lost and maybe grieving not only opportunities but loved ones and others at this time. So I feel like first and foremost it's a real privilege to be safe and healthy, to be able to be thinking about how to make this work that we do accessible. And as an artist who intermittently puts my curatorial hat on when invited to, I feel very, very lucky to be thinking locally about who I've met so far in my time in the Bay Area, whose practices I've been able to connect with. And what does local mean to me? It means, who do you run into on the street? Who do you see at the events? And now that we're in COVID, who do you see in the rooms? Supporting the spaces and artists and arts workers, cultural workers, and curators who are doing the work in the Bay. And so I believe that's all of us. And I guess I'll ask, Naz, do you have anything to say about that? Your CCA.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I can relate with that so much. I guess since I moved here from Istanbul 2 years ago, my kind of understanding of local changed dramatically 2 years ago. So I have been already depending so much on my virtual community, starting with that. But with the pandemic, I was also a little bit hesitant of all the gallery OVRs and all the exhibitions just moving into the virtual space. And I was a little bit heartbroken when our exhibition at the Wades also moved into the virtual space so abruptly. But at the same time, I'm feeling really lucky to have this virtual community that I have. We started a reading group for Asian Art Museum recently with my curatorial collective Çukurcuma. And it started as a working group, all the diaspora of artists in the Asia. And now we are having this reading group sessions every 2 weeks. If you would like to join us, it's just great to feel the love and the support of the community at this time. And at the same time, I feel happy that we have less harm on the universe and on the Mother Earth in a way. So it's more environmentally conscious. We just decrease so much of our carbon footprint on the universe. So I'm happy that that's happening at the same time. And just being happy about my virtual local community and enjoying hikes in the Golden Gate Park, enjoying my garden here, and just feeling lucky for the community that I have at the moment. And having said that, I will pass the microphone to Leila.
Thank you, Naz. It's an interesting question. I was born and raised in Oakland, and at one point, I think just being an artist in the Bay Area, having, grown up here, I used to think local was a dirty word in some ways. And it is sometimes, and unfortunately, used to reduce someone's career and their perceived reduce someone's career to their perceived local audience. And I would say that there's been a complicated sense of how place impacts creative practices, specifically in connection to negotiations of futurity and the everyday. But I think that the pandemic has caused this like major shift and much welcome shift, I would say, to happen. And as Bay Area curators, I think that there is a responsibility, maybe a felt responsibility to the local arts community that we serve. I've always thought that, I don't know, creating national and international dialogues are just as important and beneficial to the local culture, because otherwise we remain in a vacuum, right? And I think that through this newfound online presence, we're finding ways for there to be some kind of reciprocal dialogue and exchange that can unfold across geographies, which I think is super important. And it's also creating an opportunity to expand those dialogues because it's flattening access to spaces and to people, which it hasn't happened before. So I guess my perception of the word local isn't so dirty anymore. And I actually think that the ways that both Sam and Naz have framed it today is really beautiful. It's a really beautiful way to think about community here. Juana, would you like to weigh in?
Of course, thank you, Leila. Well, of course, I echo your words and being all of us in the Bay Area, even though right now I'm in Bogota, Colombia. I think we all think about local as community somehow. I think it is more connected to the relationships that we have rather than the physical space or how local or centered or off-center we are in a particular space. But one of the things that it's interesting for me to think about from the perspective of a curator, but also someone who's been also on the creative side of the story, is how can these platforms, especially now that we're talking about accessibility and reaching out to wider audiences or to colleagues and in a more intimate way too. This is not just a matter of being connected in these kind of events that have larger audiences, but how we are relating to each other. That the internet is becoming this new way for us to understand as a new space, basically. And thinking about exhibitions, especially the question that Anna and Maxine raised at the beginning, online exhibitions, what does that mean? And I have to say that I'm really excited to think about this, mostly to see how artists respond to that. And even though right now I'm invited as a curator, I think it's interesting to see how our role is as mediators of art and artists. And the internet is another layer of mediation. And this inevitably has made me think about what happened back in the 60s and 70s, even early in the 50s, with the invention of the TV and public television being a medium for artists to do things there, artworks, and experiment with that. So somehow I'm excited that the internet right now, because of the pandemic, we're forced to engage with this space, would hopefully be a space for artists to do something with. And that it's not just going to be a mediated space. And of course, again, I'm just contradicting myself, of course, being a curator and trying to have a dialogue with artists and art. But I think it's interesting to see how we are mediators ultimately, the same way that the internet is a mediation platform. So we're removing ourselves more and more from reality, or we're removing art and artists. So I'm excited to see how artists respond to this and how we can learn from them. Okay. So here's my question. One of the many things I've been thinking about during the pandemic is the question of responsibility and responsiveness. As contemporary art curators and cultural producers, I'm curious to know how you find your way through the many coexisting needs and issues that we all are faced with today. How do you choose where you want or are able to commit your energy and resources? And how does this affect your creative practice as a curator? So I'm going to choose Naz, who's very smiley, and I think she's ready.
Hi, Juana. Thank you for choosing me. So I think this is a very interesting question, and I thought a lot about this before coming in, because I guess I studied social psychology. I got my master's both in social psychology and curatory practice. And when the pandemic hit, I realized we were having this very hard time at the moment. And I was thinking like, how can I help to the community? How can I support my community? Like, how can I bring these backgrounds together? And I started having these one-on-one sessions with my artist friends, with curators, just asking them like, how are you dealing? How are you surviving? Just asking like, are you okay? Like, how can we survive this madness together? And I guess I have been also working with John Mitchell Foundation since 2015 as an artist advisor for them, like advising on how to write an artist statement, how to make like presentations as an artist. And when one of my colleagues from there reached out to me a few months ago, like saying that they will organize these workshops for Children Arts Carnival, which is an organization historically based in Harlem. But of course, with everything else, they had to also move into the virtual space, and they were organizing these workshops for the artists. And even last week, like I organized workshops about like writing artist statements or presenting about artistic practices. So I guess like what I'm trying to say is I have been really thinking about like, if I cannot curate, what else can I do as a curator? How can I give back to my community? How can I support my artistic community in a way? And that's the solution I found myself. And I feel like that's the like tactic that I came up with, that like, how can we create these kind of communal support systems to support each other? But I'm also really curious to hear from you all, and I will just pass the microphone to Sam to hear from her.
Thank you. I'm like jotting down notes as I'm hearing you speak because I want to flow with you, Naz. Thank you. I agree. I mean, when we have some basic needs that need to be met, first and foremost, our health, right? Like, so checking in and asking each other, are you well? Are you, mind, body, spirit? Are you doing okay? I love that. And beyond that, not just asking, but inquiring, do you need more time? Because we work on deadlines, right? So there's a responsibility to each other as we're doing this work to, I think, take care of each other and hold each other through this moment. But there is also, so there's taking care of oneself, taking care of one's, immediate community, colleagues, peers, family, partners, et cetera, students. But then there's also the much bigger picture that I believe it was 95% of artists have lost some basic form of income due to what's happening right now with the fallout of employment. So for me, I felt like I really needed to step into an ongoing role, but really lean in and really step into the role of creative activism. That is very important to me in working with artists and folks in who help us do what it is we do. To, if folks were furloughed, laid off, to address basic needs. I've worked with YBCA on the Artist Power Center, which is coming along beautifully. I've worked with California College of the Arts on Creative Citizens for Action, zooming in people from across the world to talk about what they're doing to help others. And it's so powerful to see the ripple effects of one person creating meals for hundreds of people, like Jocelyn Jackson, doing work with the People's Kitchen Collective. When you have folks coming out of my studio home, real time and space, setting up, artists setting up fridges outside for unhoused folks to be able to get food and nourishment in this time. So we are we're doing really important work in the studio. You know, if we can get into the right headspace to make our work, we're doing very important work behind the computer and continuing to make these exhibitions happen. But we are also, I think, really supplying support for basic needs. And lastly, I'll say we had a really crazy election cycle, and Black Lives Matter just did the damn thing. Really just globally represented the ways in which we continue to struggle for equality and humanity. And so I was also supporting that work as well, along with my peers. So, and my students. So it's all over. It's, you know, it's all hands on deck at this point. Responsiveness and responsibility is a part of my creative practice and whatever I do. What do you think, Juana?
Well, thank you so much, both of you, so far. Very inspiring, everything you've been saying, actually. Well, I wanted to share that question because it's probably the thoughts that I've been having most probably all this time. And I mean, very similar to you guys. I think it's important to not always wear the hat of I'm part of the art world and this is what I do, but actually question more who we are as human beings and what are the resources that we have already and the tools. Because I believe that even though we might be struggling, we always have something that we can offer that can be helpful for someone else. And I love that so far, Naz and Sam, both of you have mentioned the importance of reaching out to your immediate community and knowing that that's where the spiral of impact begins. And whether it's a close friend, a neighbor, someone we might not so well, or people dealing with larger, very incredible initiatives like Black Lives Matter and or things that deal with specific communities that involve hundreds of people. I think it's really important to see how we actually contribute to something. You mentioned the election season, and once again, I think it got confirmed that every single person's contribution matters. In this case, voting proved that. So in that same sense, I think is the analogy of how we can contribute to make things different. And I think it's important to learn from art, not just the things that we usually are excited about or we think that we're excited about, which is what is new or what's unique, but actually what is the intuitive reaction that we have. What is something that comes from that creative, resourceful soul of artists and art-minded people. So that's something that I think is interesting. In my case, I was able to engage in a very personal level with friends and with family, helping them create crowdfunding campaigns. I realized how many people in my life have small businesses or are, depend on the month-to-month paychecks that did not arrive for many months. So what is it that you can do being a creative person and having learned to also even fundraise money for your own little shows or for, creating initiative? That is knowledge that can be applied in any field and for anyone's life. And also, for me, it was super important to realize the importance of children and youth. And that's something that have stayed with me this whole time, because somehow I think historically we've seen how even during war times and major disasters, children are the ones who somehow represent the symbol of hope. And if we're not able to offer a world for ourselves right now, that could be a door for hope for the following generations, we're not doing much. So somehow keeping in mind children, and I had the chance and the privilege to volunteer for many months. As someone who's privileged to speak Spanish, I was helping as a tutor of children who were in areas who were extremely affected by the pandemic. I was primarily involved with a project called Escuelita en Casa in Queens, New York, when Corona, the area Corona, which was the epicenter of the epicenter, how they call it at the beginning. And it was incredible to be first inspired by the people who organized this, but also the importance of collaborating with people who have never met, who are so far away, again, through creative ways of teaching, or at least understanding what their needs were, mostly emotional, obviously. But I got so much out of that experience, I think more than what I actually was able to give to them. So that's something that stayed with me, and I hope as a curator or someone in the art world, keep thinking about it. Also the vision of children and being oriented to youth as well, not just adults. And so please, Leila, I would love to hear what you have to say too.
I mean, you all have really kind of hit the nail on the head. And I'll keep my answer short, because I think a lot of what you said, what all three of you have said, is really hit home. But it's interesting that you phrase it as like, how do you find your way through? I was talking to or speaking with a co-curator of mine, Margaret Tedesco, who I'm currently working on the 150th anniversary exhibition of SFAI with. And we've been working on that for about 1.5 years now. But we were speaking recently about how every time a pandemic happens, she mentioned AIDS and 9/11, which at the time I wasn't curating. Obviously I was too young, but we as cultural producers and creators are often asked to negotiate the times. And, really that kind of seems to elevate our opinions in a way that is or can be kind of counterproductive. But something that all of you have really said, which is finding ways to direct our money and resources to people and spaces who need it, is sort of at the nucleus of finding everyone's way through that. And supporting efforts that do this instead of prioritizing our own visibility or ideas or creative practices. And to keep things in kind of a flow state, Sam mentioned health and basic needs. I'd say I find my way through these shifting needs by building systems for myself and for the people I work with, like systems of communication, organizational systems. And I think those, like, creating systems specifically gives me the ability to like set boundaries for myself and prioritize what is needed at any given moment in time. Yeah, I really think that the key here is to be adaptable. And for me, it's all about relationships and building relationships with people that you work with and negotiating your commitments to those people and communities as they shift and as their needs shift, and not being afraid of adapting to technology and having to, deal with the awkward negotiation of figuring out how to meet people, That's my answer. I think we have more questions for you, for everyone now.
We do. I'm just enjoying this so much. It's my turn to ask my question, but I needed 1 minute of silence to digest that all. So here you go. Thank you so much again. As some of you know, I have been interested in speculative fiction and ecofeminism for a while now as a methodology to imagine alternative futures and world building. And I would like to discuss with you all, maybe following up on this question by Juana, how we imagine the future of art and what needs to be done. How can we speculatively imagine an alternative world building for the art world's hierarchies and structures to dismantle and reimagine them? What are some curatorial and artistic methodologies? And how do you deal with this question in your practice? I would like to ask Juana first.
Thank you, Naz. I love this question. I love dreaming about possibilities, and I think this is what this is about. What are the possibilities? Maybe I'm just gonna answer this question following what I was saying earlier, the other question, which is the focus on youth. Perhaps one of the things that I feel that I would love to see in this possible future is more mentorship. And I think we all can mentor people and also choose the right mentors for ourselves. That's something that I think has to do with everything where we're trying to deal with today. Representation is one of those things, access as well, opportunities, equity, I think is fundamental. We all know that to be able to be part of the art world, it's a filter. Not everyone gets to be part of it. And it's a filter that's very young in our first years in our life. I think the four of us are extremely lucky people that for different reasons we were able to get to this point. But the odds are really, it's strange. It's not easy. And it comes with privileges and all the privileges that we know. And also mostly for having people who trust us or trust those young people who have so much potential and can believe that it's possible to be an artist or to be a cultural producer of some kind, and that their voice matters. But that's something that I believe strongly that has to be cultivated from an early stage in our lives. And that's something that I would like to see could be put in practice outside of academia, outside of institutions, outside of this need to institutionalize everything. Something that can actually be learned from this experience of self-organization, and then hopefully that's going to become something more natural that we all do. But mentorship is a way for me to think about the future. So I'm gonna ask Sam, who's taking very serious notes, to please.
My brain is just going now. First of all, this question or series of questions, should I say, is it feels like one, like I'm sort of peeling back an onion here. So I will try to keep this succinct. But when I first read your questions, Naz, I thought about the fact that I'm going to be contributing to an issue of a political architect magazine. And it just so happens that the theme is cyberspace. And so in 1984, science fiction writer William Gibson coined the term cyberspace as a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators. So he goes on to say, as the internet became commercially available, architects hoped that this virtual space would form a computer-generated public commons. Cyberspace is mythic. It could be the very essence of architecture, wrote critic Aaron Betsky in his 1995 publication on the subject. And so, I was thinking about if cyberspace was a physical landscape, we're thinking like shopping malls, bars, restaurants, post offices, all of which, have been impacted by the pandemic, right? Then we also are enmeshed with digital spaces, online stores, dating apps, our email inboxes. So amidst this moment, it feels like our relationship between the physical and virtual is again changing. I have never spent this much amount of time online ever in my life. And so that may be different for others, but I feel like most of us realize that the internet has become a primary site of work, education, and social interaction as we know it. And so this could go many different ways. I think it could be, some people feel like a dystopic energy around some of that, but that's not my personality nor my belief system. I'm going to try to keep it positive and lean into a sort of utopian aspect in which there's a lot of potential here. I want to center the scholarship of Black women in this new digital space, in this virtual space. I want to encounter new faces, new people that I may not have encountered in the physical spaces before. And I want to be able to critique and change the systems of power that have created major barriers for folks like myself, who look like me, and folks who don't even have the kind of entry point into a conversation like the one we're having right now because of gatekeeping, or because of lack of access, or because of missed opportunities or being skipped over. So what can we do, right, to take advantage of this cyberspace reality? These are questions that I'm always thinking about, and my curatorial methodology is to think about who I've been in conversation with about these questions for some time, bring them in, and begin to ask them, what are you making? How are you responding to this? And see where we can come up with a show from there. It happens pretty organically, I think, as it pertains to just conversations that we're having about these questions. So thank you for the questions. I'll pass it to Leila.
Beautifully stated, Tam. I didn't actually, I don't want to undermine such a beautiful question, Naz, because I really see the importance, especially in the ways that Sam answered the question, and also the ways that you incorporate it into your practice. But I don't really spend time imagining the future of art. I think I understand critical visual and expressive culture to be fugitive and unpredictable. I don't actually want to know the future before it happens. I think it kind of takes all the fun out of the possibilities that reveal themselves in moments of change and discomfort. And I think those moments of discomfort allows for the disruption of normalcy and gatekeeping, like Sam was just saying, and allows for all of these different identities to find shape in new spaces and formats. So let's keep it nebulous and huge question mark. But I'm curious what your answer to your own question is, Naz.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time, but maybe just briefly, I guess the exhibition that I'm curating for Slash is maybe a good example for that. Like, I have been interested in this idea of mythological creatures for a while now. And where I'm coming from is that, like, after I came to the States, I found myself in this situation of alien. Suddenly, I was the non-resident alien. And just like finding myself in the position of the other, and just thinking what the other means and how it has been understood throughout the history and throughout all this tale making and like the narrative makings, how subjective it is, how history is so man-made. Like, I guess for me to think about the future is like, can we think about it, like as you also suggested, Leila, in a way that like we can also challenge that and maybe, I don't know, demand this power back and demand our stories and narratives back. Like, is it even possible? But I am aware that it's an experiment, and I have also learned to hold on to the small victories throughout the time. But I guess, yeah. And it was great to hear from all of you. And I'll just pass it back to you, Leila, so that you can ask your question.
Yeah, I think my question to all of you as curators is really about the things that kind of drive your thinking and your creative process. I want to know, what are some of the conceptual themes that drive your curatorial practice, and how have you gone about collecting and processing information around those particular themes? And I know that some of you have touched on them briefly in different ways in your answers, but to give a sort of cohesive package answer. Juana, would you like to answer first?
Sure. um, I think it just changes all the time. I mean, when I read your question, I was tempted to say, like, of course I have a method. Of course, this is the way I work. But I, at least personally, am not someone who only experiences things through an intellectual, conceptual um, channel. And I think I allow myself to navigate precisely what I'm curious about, which usually comes from experiencing the world. My world is highly populated by art and artists, so a lot of these questions and points of entry of curiosity come from that. I love talking with artists. I absolutely love having access to, I mean, the Bay Area. One of the gifts that the Bay Area has given me is musicians, and especially experimental musicians and poets. So it's all the different worlds. Somehow I feel that stay with me. I'm not the kind of person that is obviously taking notes. I mean, not that I'm saying that that's bad, Sam. I would like to be like you. But when I go to, a talk, or when I'm, attending something, I just absorb things, and I trust that something stays there and resonates with other things that have been, lingering in my mind for a while. But I would say my process is very intuitive. At the same time, I really value books. Growing up in Colombia, and feeling since I was very young that I was an artist, or somehow that I belonged to this part of the world. My only resource was books, or actually the books of my teachers or people that I knew, because I could not have access to certain things that way. So it's not like, and of course this is pre-internet, so it was mostly books and this kind of resources that allowed me to open a new world. So I would say sometimes it's that, and it happens really randomly, I would say, too. I allow the process to guide me more than me being very rigorous about it often. So Naz, would you like to tell us what you think about this too?
Yeah, I guess for me, and I love that you ended up with the books, Juana, but for me, I guess the core is really the collaborative thinking in a way, because I have been part of this curatorial collective for too long. Probably everything else evolves around it a little bit. And I use collaborative thinking both as a curatorial concept, but also as a research methodology too. It's a curatorial concept in the way that with my collective, we organize exhibitions in which we pair artists and curators with each other to think together and come up with their artworks and come up with their projects in a way. But it's also, collaboration is also a research methodology in the way that I depend on my community so much when I'm making research. They just throw at me all these like beautiful inspirations, books to read, movies to watch. Like I just feel so lucky. And it usually leads, like it's the snowball effect, and it leads to the exhibition in the end for me most of the time. But when I am making the hands-on app, like when I'm hands-on doing the research, like I kind of feel similar to Juana, that like I like to go, I am a little bit old-fashioned. I like to go to the library, and like I really like the serendipity, like getting lost around the shelves and just discover something that you wouldn't normally discover maybe otherwise. Like I just enjoy that process so much. And as a matter of fact, the first exhibition I curated was at a library after Alexandria the flood. And the House of Wisdom exhibition that we curated with my collective was also a library itself. So I think there's something about the libraries for me, like them being public spaces and just being equal and accessible. And like, I feel like they're so close to the utopia in my mind in a way somehow. That's how I like to do my research. But I would also love to hear from you, Leila, like how would you answer this question? How do you make your research?
Well, I think I asked this question because I approach my curatorial practice from an artist's perspective, which is interesting that you often pair artists and curators in your collective. I love that process. And I guess that process is constantly happening in my own mind. But I'd say my work across the board, as an artist, a curator, an educator, I often find myself chasing sensorial experiences. And mostly, I would say the primitive senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. But I'm often drawn to and look for artworks that call for multiple points of engagement, and artworks that enable a kind of space for questioning my body's position in time and space. And I know that sounds kind of elusive, but I really do look for work that kind of pushes these boundaries of the traditionally prioritized senses in art, most obvious being the visual and auditory. And I really have a hunger for work that attempts to situate itself in the sensorial memory of the body, because I feel like it really opens up a world in which a variety of people are able to engage with something that may be new to them, because really I feel like you can discover identity through memory. And that is how I approach my own practice as an artist. And whenever I step into an art space, I whether I'm looking at an installation or watching a film or video work, I kind of always pay attention to the many shifts that occur in my own body while a particular narrative is taking shape. And I would say that it's kind of the same thing I ask of my students and people who come to see my work or work that I curate. Obviously, it changes depending on the show and what the ask of me as a curator is and of the artists I'm working with. But I think it's a constant process of collecting data from people and their honest, like, bodily responses to a given work, because like I said before, identity exists within memory for me. And sensorial memory, I think, presents this tremendous possibility if and when we use it as a stepping stone in art. Sam, what drives you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so much, so much. I mean, I love looking at art. I love looking at art. Yeah, I go to exhibitions all the time. I mean, one of the real uh, sort of tough moments for me was realizing that my frenetic need to see as much as I usually love to see was unavailable to me in ways that I could just kind of step into a gallery and take in the show, because there are some galleries that and institutions that did have to close down. They opened and they closed down again. So having to really go online and start digging into the tools that I already use pretty much on a daily basis anyway, like social media and digital archives and different rabbit holes of websites really have been very helpful for me as I deal with the fact that I can't see art in person as often. I also am very lucky because I'm friends and colleagues with a lot of independent curators who are in conversation with me about what they're doing, who they're looking at, who they're showing, who they want to work with. And so I'm able to bounce off of them. And I'm also an educator. So I'm constantly being able to see the beautiful, powerful creations of my students on a regular basis as well. I'm surrounded by making and by it really, I think, rigorous studio practices that motivate me to conceive of ideas. Now, when I first started this, the first show that I was asked to curate was a show of recently graduated, whether it be an MFA or BFA students. And I thought to myself, okay, at the time I was 23 years old, and I said, how am I going to do this? Do I just cold call these people? But it's actually really wonderful to be able to have a platform like, say, the Affordable Art Fair and reach out to folks and say, would you be interested in this? And they do respond. So sometimes there are just opportunities like that, like themes that are a jumping off point into bringing folks who may not have ever been in the same showing together in proximity to one another. So I think it's a combination for me between thematic opportunities that have been brought to my attention, see if I want to try to engage with a prompt. And then also, on the other hand, it's desire-based research. And I think for Slash, what I'm really interested in is working with artists who I've admired in the Bay Area for some time that have never been in conversation with each other, to my knowledge. And I'm going to ask them too. But I think that's really important to me, because I think that that brings up themes that I'm personally interested in, and I'll list them: blind spots, illegibility, literary point of departure, empathy, feeling, gravity, dislocation, identity, memory, diaspora, social function of artworks and art spaces, collective spirit, language and translation. These are some themes that come up for me. Oh, thank you. I think I'm the last person to ask a question. Okay, so my question is really about the artists. We all love artists. We they're not always the easiest to work with, myself included, but we love them. How does your interaction with the artists you work with, the creative folks you work with, evolve from your initial encounter with their work to the studio visit, and then to the realization of an exhibition? How do you form relationships? And I'll ask Naz about that.
I guess for me, it happens very organically, that relationship with the artists. Like, it usually starts even before the studio visit. It happens for me at a table. It's either a dinner table or a breakfast table. I'm from Turkey. Food is very important. So it's really important that we have this intimate personal conversation, and then we are just feeding each other with our thoughts, and we are inspiring each other, exchanging ideas. And then after that, I usually read. I'm a reader too, so I like to read everything written about them, or written by them too. I just love to do that. And I like that we are a chosen family for each other, and to develop this kind of kinship and allyship. I really value that. It's at the very core of my practice in a way. Because of that, I usually also invite other artists into the conversation too. Sometimes we have a reading group together, for example. If I'm working on an exhibition, we read about each other's work or about the exhibition theme, so that we can really go deep into this idea together. It's really important for me. I think really, and we have been running this reading group for so long now, it's also part of that idea of breaking the hierarchies of knowledge, breaking the hierarchies of academia. How can we get rid of those authorities and hierarchies? I'm really interested in that question. So for me, with artists, it's very all about community building and empowering my community. But I would also love to hear from you, Juana.
Thank you, Naz. I love this question because it's a very complicated question to answer to me. I feel that it depends, I'm going to speak for myself, but I guess you all can relate to this. It all depends of where is the potential for something to take place, because as an independent curator, it's very different to reach out to artists or to look for archives of something versus being affiliated to an institution or running your own space is interesting. I've experienced all the different versions that I just mentioned, and one thing in common that I feel has continued being part of my practice, the relationship building with artists, is similar to Naz, I guess. I'm curious. I always enjoy the company of artists. I consider myself an artist in a way too. So I feel that whenever I feel comfortable with my peers, and when I say peers, it's people that I feel we're equals to, that treat me and I can treat as equal, things start to happen. And there's comfort, and there's room for friction in a productive way. I'm always curious to know what the artists are looking at, more than the things that have been done already by them. Of course, there's reasons why I get to be interested in artists, but I'm always curious to know, what are you looking at? What are, from what are you reading to what did you just watch, or what are you paying attention to right now? Because that leads to other things that I'm able to learn from. And I'm always excited to be able to learn from those worlds that open up at the moment that you ask that question. And I think that what leads then to something. Sometimes, in the case of Slash, I'm really excited right now to be seeing finally in the horizon the possibility of opening the show we are calling Arboreal. It's a small group show that I'm very excited about, because I was able to bring together my interest in, or my questions, let's put it this way, around the environment and interconnectivity in nature. And I think the pandemic is one of the most enlightening experiences, or confusing experiences at the same time, for dealing with this topic. But talking with artists and seeing how they deal with a question that you, as a curator or a cultural producer or an instigator of sorts, is really enriching. Just listening to what happens, and that takes you to the things. I really rarely start with a very strict checklist of artists and things that I want. I usually have kind of the pillars of a potential show that I would like to have, either with living artists, maybe with some archive, maybe with something that is not even an art object. And then that constellation somehow leads me to things that I have not planned. Very similar to what Leila was saying earlier about the future, and being excited to be surprised by the future. That's somehow what I enjoy doing. And that comes with the process. And I'm a huge believer and fan of processes too. So that's how I deal with that. So Sam, I would love to know what you think about this and your experience, since you asked the question too.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by artists, so there's a lot of personalities always in the mix. I love going to art events, because you get a chance to really talk to the artists, and and then maybe let's go out to coffee, or now in this time, let's just have a nice Zoom conversation that maybe is not so art focused. But like you said, you begin to understand what a parallel practice might be for that artist, or their hobbies, or other things. And so the friendships that are forged in this work that we do are so intimate, because as an artist, the work that I do, I put my soul into it, blood, sweat, and tears into it, right? So I know that that intimate connection that I'm building with other artists, as we talk about our development and our careers, is shared. There's a lot of sharing and empathy, I think, that goes into the work that I do in organizing and curating events and shows of artists. I will say, though, that I, in a previous life, was a development and marketing manager for a contemporary art space. So when I put on my curatorial hat, I'm like, okay, let's get down to business. And I really do have to be a little serious when it comes to getting what I need from folks that I'm working with, and really trying to kind of rein in some of the big ideas that might be floating up here, kind of bring it down to the ground a little bit, depending on what it is we're doing, the budget, etc. But I think that really what I love about curating is just digging in deeper to what an artist is making in their studio, because you can see a thumbnail of something that they post, or read a little snippet or here or there, but it just feels so transient, So being able to really kind of dig in and see, what did I miss? What am I not seeing? What's behind this? Get those like anecdotal stories going, ask questions about the titles. How long has this been bubbling for you, this work or this series? Those are moments that I feel I'm kind of like an insider into the making, into the where the magic happens. So yeah, I think this, we're not able to go into each other's studios as easily as we once did, but these virtual studio visits have been really, I think, helpful in ways that I wasn't expecting, because you can have those high res pictures with sharing your screen, and at the same time, have a conversation in which maybe the noise of the studio isn't distracting you as much from what it is you want to talk about. I don't know. I miss being in studios with artists, but I think there is something to the screen sharing that really gets to detail, really being able to kind of like talk about things for longer periods of time. What else do I want to say? Yeah, there's just, I mean, we're a crazy bunch, you got to track us down sometimes. So that's also the joy of it, trying to get us all in one room in one kind of mission to bring an exhibition together. So for Slash, I'm really fortunate because the folks that I'm wanting to include in the show are folks that I've either shared studio space with, have been close to the work, have been close to the practice, and I'm just hoping that everyone can participate. What do you think, Leila?
This is an interesting question, because I think, like, for me, it really depends on the kind of exhibition I'm planning. For example, in a large group exhibition of films, like the new labor movements at McAvoy, the process would look a lot different than if I were curating a show that has 1 to 3 artists. But one of the artists that I've been in communication with for the exhibition at Slash is a deaf artist, which has presented a new challenge, especially because the pandemic. And I first encountered their work in an essay that they'd written about their negotiations around non-normative identities. And then I had my students engage with their essay and artworks in my installation as a sensorial practice class, which was kind of served as like a way to workshop my own ideas. And oftentimes in classes, I find, or at least my method of teaching is a hybrid method where it's a sharing environment, and knowledge is shared in both directions. But from that class, I was interested in building this series of exhibitions around the ideas of the sensorial, because there are many ways to address that concept outside of my own practice as an artist. And I think the real evolution that took place for this particular artist that I'm working with for Slash has been in negotiating communication, obviously, especially during a time where travel is impossible. There are international, Zoom conversations with a deaf artist is not as possible or as easy. And the sensorial possibilities have, in more or less words, been collapsed by certain limitations in technology. So what I hope to evolve in this relationship and in any creative relationship is to develop a language during the phase of ideation that can carry through to realizing the work in a physical space. I kind of consider it like a temporary symbiosis of some sort. And that's where the evolution lives for me. I know that we're kind of, aren't we at the end of our time here?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna just answer briefly. Go ahead, Maxine.
No, that's great. Thank you all so much. This has been so amazing to listen and to see all of you in conversation with one another. Since we are going a little bit over time, I'm going to try to kind of combine some of the audience questions. And one or two seem kind of connected to what you all were just discussing, which is how the relationship with artists evolves as you work with them. And I'm seeing here a question by Alejandra, who asks, I am a new artist and recent graduate. How do I connect with curators? And along those lines, Manoush also asks, how do you find community when you're not educated from a school in the US? So both of those kind of asking about how artists can find curators and community. And I think that question is also different now in these times where we're also isolated and online. And how do you connect to curators as an artist who's just entering the community? If anybody wants to jump in, not everybody has to answer necessarily, but if anybody wants to jump in.
I mean, thank you all for the questions. That's a really legit way to start this Q&A. But my way of answering, I don't think there is a particular method to reach out to curators. I would say, and I would encourage artists to do not depend on curators to show their work, and a way to actually make curators to start organizing their own little exhibitions and to collaborate with artists and with friends, with peers on doing things. Sadly, the reality is that this is the art world is true. I mean, it's centered in specific regions, in specific cities, I would say, even argue, but doesn't have to be the case. And I think it's interesting to be able to empower our own selves by self-organizing things too, and do not believe that to be able to be seen and to be validated and to be able to have opportunities, someone is going to do it for us. So I would always encourage artists, do your own projects, start something else, and invite maybe people that you admire, that you follow in social media, that's a teacher of a school that you have access to, and that way you start building relationships, and they can come see something that it's an invitation to their own world. Yeah, that's my opinion and my word of encouragement to artists.
I would also add to that I view myself as an artist who curates, not as a curator artist. So I'm right there with you. I feel like as an artist, we have really special perspectives actually on how to put a show together. The biggest hurdle is, where do we put it? Where can this work be shown? That's always the biggest piece. Because of a lot of red tape, sometimes it's challenging to get a foot in the door to a brick and mortar institution, or to be given access, the keys to a space to organize something. That's the challenging part. But there are really beautiful organizations that focus on empty storefronts or buildings that don't currently have spaces in which there are invitations to launch something and make something happen. So if you're not directly connected to an institution, there are ways, I think, and support that the Bay Area does have towards getting the work seen and visible. I'm also a huge fan of guerrilla tactics, just getting the work out there on the pedestrian level. There's a lot of work that has happened around political movements lately that have been co-signed by the politicians, but really came out of grassroots organizing. Okay, so sometimes you have to do something and apologize later. Thank you.
Does anyone want to add to that? No. Okay, then I think I'll end with this question just because we are running low on time. So it's a question asked by Christina Linden, and I think it's connected a lot to Naz's question actually, and what you've all been talking about. But as independent curators working at a time when normal context has been largely suspended and when we are experiencing an increased energy for systemic change, what kinds of platforms and/or institutions existing or yet to be created do you wish to be working with in the coming years?
I know we are running out of time, so I just noted down 3 things, I guess, important for me. I thought that equal pay for everyone and no entrance fee. And the third one would be accessible at all costs and accessible in all ways.
I'd say institutions and platforms that have the means, the willingness, and I guess the drive to adapt to whatever we may face in the future, because we don't know what those things are, right? And I think, institutions need to not be stuck in whatever their pre-existing structures were. And they have to be willing to break out of whatever historical frameworks they think they've created or what kind of systems they've created for their, for their space to function. I want to work with spaces who aren't afraid to be challenged or questioned or pushed for those exact reasons that Naz listed. And I guess that's sort of my simple answer.
Thank you. Sam or Juana, do you want to jump in?
Say something just to complement. You said Juana or Anna?
I said Juana or Sam, either of you.
Okay,
Want to
okay. Just quickly, what the list of that Naz said, I think is really important. I would also say it's important to see the structure of each institution, and even without trying to be too reactionary or suspicious about people. I think it's important to see who are the faces and what are the values of the institution that are actually performed by the people who are part of the institution. Institution is people. It's not a mission and a statement written on with letters. I think it's the people and the coherence that we see of those missions and those values reflecting on how they behave in the world. So that's something that I think is really important to think about too.
I'll just quickly add that I really need all of us to really take a look at how institutional racism is impacting all of us, and specifically with a president that supported white supremacy, how we can move forward from the last 4 years and even before that, and really think about the healing work that needs to be done.
Thank you all so much. Really working forward to sharing your curatorial vision with everybody, local or not. I just want to say thank you to the audience as well. Also a special shout out to 8 Bridges for organizing SF Art Week. There are a lot of events happening this week on their website. You can check them out. And thank you again.